Okay, so we're going to be on page 784, and before we get started with the poems that are in here, sorry, I got to close that. Y'all don't need that up. Sorry, that thing's slow to load. I accidentally hit it all the time. Close. There it goes. All right. So the poems we're going to read today are actually people writing about poetry. You know, it's people writing about, it's not just poems about flowers, death, love, the three big ones. They're going to write about, come on. They're going to write about poems themselves. Let me close this out, guys. I apologize. Close. Okay. So this first one is going to be a pretty easy one, and I don't know if I've showed this to you guys or not, but if I have, great. You probably forgot. I mean, I don't know why you'd remember it, but if you, even if you do remember it, it's going to be really useful for what we're about to talk about. All right. So this guy here, Billy Collins, is a modern poet. He's a professor. I forget what college he's at, but he's a professor. He teaches poetry, and he's really good. So he writes modern stuff that's a lot easier to understand. So we're going to listen to his poem where he's actually talking about what it's like to teach poems to kids that come to his university. All right, and then we're going to look at some in here that are a little more complex, and we'll try to figure out what's going on. So let's go with this one first. I think it's just the. Okay, no, let me stop it. I know what's going to happen before I even start. So let's get this set up. It's going to try to play through the microphone again because my computer isn't stupid. Settings. Sound. Speakers. Okay, now we're going to gamble and see if it actually will play. Who knows?
Introduction to poetry.
All right. All right, that's pretty. No, I'm going to listen to it again. Okay, so that's a pretty interesting idea of how he says your age group, a little bit older, college students, approach poems. He said, what does he want them to do? I know you can't see it again, but you listen. You didn't forget it in 2 seconds. What kinds of, even if you just repeat some of the images he said, what does it seem like he wants them to do? Okay, good. He talks about that. I'm going to help you with it. Don't worry. It's a poem. You don't just come out and say, I want them to think about things and actually puzzle it out instead of assuming there's just one right answer. Okay? Every image he uses is something where you have to, there's interpretation. Even if it's just holding up, he said like a color slide. Like if your great-grandparents had one of those machines that was like a carousel that had a bunch of slides in it, and it makes this horrible noise when it switches. And, and if you were to take one out, it's kind of hard to see it, to hold up the light and kind of squint and really think about it. He uses that image. He uses the image of coming into a dark room and not knowing where the light is. You can't see anything, so you feel around on the wall looking for it until you find it. The mouse imagery of dropping it into a maze and watching it look around. He's trying to point out that he wants them to experience the poem, to think about what's in it. Not just immediately assume, what's the theme? Let's get to that. What's the message? Okay. And that's the only thing. He says, and then did you catch the imagery he uses for what they actually do to the poem? Yeah. It's like they put it in a chair and torture a confession out of it and beat it with a hose. And that's about how you guys would approach it. If I was like, hey, here's a poem, tell me what you think. You guys would immediately go to what it means. And there would be like, if you read it just for that purpose. Again, like a confession, beating it out of a criminal. Like, I don't really care about you. Just tell me what you did. So that's kind of the thing. Poems aren't meant to be done that way. All right? They're just not. There's supposed to be a level of thinking. The guy we showed you yesterday, E.E. Cummings, you're not going to read his poetry and not have to think about it. Thomas isn't going to read it and be like, oh, okay, I get it. Here's the meaning. I mean, good luck. Yeah, I mean that one you took forever. That girl explaining it. And some of us are still like, no, I don't know about that. Y'all didn't actually get farther. The sixth period class we watched a little more. It shows how there's actually a grasshopper when you draw lines around the middle of it. It actually shaped like a grasshopper. It was weird. Okay, but how many of you think about when you're reading a poem? Maybe I should draw lines around the outside of it. I mean, maybe now you might think about it, but for most of us, that's just not a thing. All right. So I realize that for some of you, that's annoying because we live in a world where facts rule, right? Especially in an academic world, in a high school setting, where we teach you all the time, hey, here's the table of the elements, memorize it. Here's some math formulas, memorize it. Here's a bunch of dates and some crusty old dudes who did stuff, memorize it. All right? English class, here's a bunch of terms that you'll never use in real life, memorize it. Okay? And you go and take tests, and there's one right answer. And that's it. So it's not your fault that when we get to poems, you approach it with that same mentality. That, there's one right answer. Mr. Morse is going to ask us, what does this mean? And I got to figure out what it means from this. And that's the end of it. And that's this poor Billy Collins, this poor teacher, is saying, I wish that they would just try to figure it out. Just take some time to think about it. All right. I grew up in, just to say how old I am, I was born in 78. Okay, so I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I remember getting a Nintendo when they were actually the first Nintendo, little boxy things, okay? And even when the Super Nintendo came out, I remember getting games, and when you got stuck and you didn't know how to do something, you couldn't go to the internet 2 seconds later and look it up and watch a walkthrough on it. You better go to school and figure out if somebody else knows. Hey, and I remember, I don't know if any of you play older games. I remember Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. First few guys are really easy. You get to this guy named King Hippo, who would whoop your butt. Every kid hit that wall. Did you play this? Yeah, every kid hit that wall. If you didn't know what to do, how you had to fight him. So you had one of two or three options. One, you hope you had Nintendo Power and they talked about it in one of those issues. Hey, if not, you wrote a letter and hoped within the next 3 months you got an answer to your game, and you just kept trying on your own. Two, you hope one of your classmates knew. Or three, you kept going until you figured it out. You hit him in the mouth when he opens his mouth, and then his pants fall down. You punch him in the belly a bunch. But, that's it. But you wouldn't know that normally because all you know, you take a swing at him, he hits you once, and you're done. Yeah. But, the only reason I knew is because, again, I didn't figure it out. But there were lots of other games that had puzzles in them that you had to sit there and kind of work through and figure them out. Of course, we don't do that now. And that's part of, and I'm going to sound like an old man here. You guys forgive me, all right? But that's part of what these things are designed to do is for you to figure out the puzzle. It's the same concept of if you go, I guess a better example for it today is playing things on a harder mode. Because you can look up a walkthrough, doesn't mean you're going to be able to pull it off. Or you guys, if you play online with people. I mean, I thought I was really good at Madden until I played online and got, obliterated. All right, I was like, I got this. I mean, I'm winning games by 96-3. I got this, and I get in there, and I can't complete a pass. I can't get positive yardage. I mean, I snap the ball, and whoever it is must know exactly what I'm about to do because I'm about to get hit in the backfield right away. If I throw the ball, it's getting picked off and run back. Guaranteed. Okay? And there's nothing more frustrating than I guess if I kept playing, I might get better. I don't know. But, that's kind of what this is supposed to be like, figuring it out. I remember, I'm not a big multiplayer type of person, but I would play Red Dead Redemption online. I'd play that, and I'd get crushed a bunch till I figured it out. I mentioned yesterday, Dark Souls is my favorite game, and I'll play that. The first few times I played it, I got just destroyed constantly. Through controllers, broke controllers, had my wife take my video game away because I was getting a little bit too angry, all right? And you can watch videos on it all you want. Doesn't mean you can do it. It's still hard, all right? So you keep trying, eventually you get there. And let me tell you something. The great thing is once you finally pull it off, I remember I don't know, I may be completely talking about something, y'all, it might be Greek to you guys. You have no clue what I'm talking about. The first Dark Souls, about midway through, there's a part where you have to fight 2 guys at one time. All right? You beat one of them, and the other one gets hulks up and gets super powered and gets even scarier. And now you got to find a way to beat him too. All right? I spent 3 weeks, about 4 or 5 summers ago, trying to beat that. I would have the TV on up here, and I had this little small 19-inch TV hooked up on this little table I had in the kitchen. I would be watching TV, I'd play that, and I'd die, and I'd die, and I'd die. And I had it hooked up where I could, save it, on the cloud, so that if I died enough, I could just reload that save and I wouldn't lose all my stuff. So I can keep doing that because I'm a cheater that way. All right. So let me tell you something though. When I finally beat them, I like texting my wife, man, I finally beat those, because my wife does not care. She thinks video games are for 6-year-olds, and I'm a complete loser for playing them. All right. But man, I was so excited. I wanted to call my mom and say, Mom, I beat them finally. She doesn't know either. But I was so excited and proud of myself, like I had completed something. All right. That is really an exaggerated version of what people like Billy Collins want us to do. Not call your mom and say, hey, I figured out that E.E. Cummings poem. Nobody cares about that. But that's kind of I see what they're doing now. That makes sense. And so I'm teaching a really hard play in my AP class. And whenever, I'm explaining to them what these two characters are doing, and it clicks with one of them, you can see them going, like that, all of a sudden now it all makes sense. And it's that feeling that you're wanting to go for with these, and to, experience it and then figure it out for yourself. Because in all honesty, Thomas may think one thing, Hunter may think something else, Quentin may think something else than what I suggest. In my class, that's totally okay, as long as you can support it. Now, if we're reading a poem about a flower, and Johnny's like, it's about death. It's about death because flowers die. And if that's all he's got, that's wrong, okay? You're going to have to give me more than that, all right? But the point here is that, it's not meant to be just, okay, read it, it's confusing. I hope you can figure out what the meaning is. That's what my teachers did to me in high school. I think I've told you before, was I in school originally to be an English teacher? Not at all. I was there to be an engineer because I hated English. Because it was like, I don't get these poems, and every time I think it means this, and I think I came up with something really smart, the teacher's like, nope, you're wrong. F on your test. I'm like, forget English class. We'll go back to math. 2 + 2 is 4. Hunter knows that. Josh knows that. Miles knows that. And I know that. So I'm going to take that class. And, of course, I got it there where math is not even actual, like, numbers or Americanized letters. They were all, like, Greek letters and symbols. And at that point, I was like, done with that. But English started to make more sense then because teachers were thinking like he was. What do you think it means? Well, I guess I think it means this, this, and this. That's a really good answer. I never thought about it that way. It's like, wait, am I right? Oh. There's not really a right or wrong. And it took me a minute to get past that. Like, there's not a right or wrong, but that's kind of what they would do. And it got to be where, as long as you were trying to figure it out for yourself, that's all they cared about. All right. Now, we're not going to do this right now. But I want to look at these 3 poems we've got. And then if we've got time, we'll come back and look at that. I know TED Talks are not y'all's favorite thing. I love them. I could watch them about anything. But I'm an old man, and I'm a teacher. So obviously I like boring things, right? Let's look on page, we started here on page 784. You've got just your 3, obligatory vocab terms, which you guys know what imagery is. Imagery is just sense-based details that, kind of make the poem a little bit more tangible for you so you understand stuff. You've got personification. That's where we take something that's not human and give it human qualities. All right. Emily Dickinson did it with death a lot. All right. Finally, you've got similes. Similes are just comparisons. They do use like or as. That is the dumbest definition in this book, though. Okay. The difference in a metaphor and a simile is not like and as. All right. The difference is a metaphor makes a lot more connections. If I say, Hunter is, a jackal. I don't know why you'd be a jackal. It just popped in my head, okay? If I said that, we're not just saying he's, I don't know, even jackals do. Hunter is a leopard. Let's go there. Well, he's fast. Well, that's not a metaphor. You say Hunter is like a jackal at that point because you just say there's some similarities. Okay, this game is like that game. Well, it's because it's got 1 or 2 qualities that fit it. A metaphor, on the other hand, is meant to be really detailed and thought out. So we're going to talk about similes in here. We talked about metaphors a while back, all right? Okay, so let's look at Wallace Stevens first, one called Of Modern Poetry. All right, we'll get the background for you. It says, Wallace Stevens' poetry reflects the influence of the symbolist literary movement. Oh, great. We had imagists before. Now we've got symbolists. Let's just use common sense here. If the imagist poems were built around an image, what do you think a symbolist poem is going to be built around? Wow, yeah, it's really clever, right? Great naming. Okay, so symbols here. Originating in the last half of the 19th century, symbolist poets believed that ideas and emotions are difficult to communicate because people perceive the world in such personal ways. That's a really good statement. I would agree. It's really hard for me to talk about sadness because what I get sad about is different than what Anna Clayson gets sad about. All right, so that's kind of an issue. All right. Says the poets tried to convey meaning through symbols, people, places, and objects that represent ideas beyond their concrete meanings. As a result, the work of symbolist poets like Stevens can often have many interpretations. You see, this is one of those things where it's okay if you get different images. All right, think about symbols we have today. I can give you two right now. And y'all understand I'm not commenting on how I feel about them. I'm just saying that you can tell if you look around the world. The American flag has different meanings to different people, not only in our country, but around the world. You may think it means one thing, but someone else may think it means something else. Who's right? No one. I mean, or both of you. It's up to you. You don't get to. I can't tell you, Hunter, no, the American flag means this. All right, it's what you mean. Same thing with the cross. Think about that. Throughout time, how that's changed. You know, if you go back before Jesus, what do you think people thought about the cross? I mean, it's kind of ironic that we venerate it the way we do. I mean, you think about it, Jesus was hung on it. You know, you don't really. I mean, I just got done playing. I know I'm talking about video games a lot today. One of the things at Assassin's Creed, the new one, they make the Vikings make that comment. They were going to talk about how weird it is that Christians worship a symbol of something that their God was killed on. That's kind of true, I guess. So if you're not a Christian, that has a completely different meaning than it does to me, where I don't see it as that. I see it as a symbol of God overcoming. But would it be better if you use like a cave with a rock in front of it? Because Jesus rose out of the grave. So there's a lot of things about symbols that depending on who you are, you may take it totally differently. I think I told you guys about when I started dating my wife, her best friend who committed suicide was like very anti-religion. Hated the fact that I was a youth minister and was working for the church, and he was an atheist and was into witchcraft, which I'm not sure that those two work together, but I guess whatever. So he was doing that, and so he would see that cross, and he made a comment to me one time. He's like, "Oh, that represents oppression of people like me." And I want to tell him, "No, you're wrong," but in my head, what I think it means is definitely not that. But I can't tell him what he believes. So I could argue with him and say, well, that's your opinion. That's not what I think. I don't put it up there because I'm like, who am I going to oppress today? Never been my thought pattern. But that's kind of the way he took it. So, symbols are really just, it's hard to pin them down. Y'all are lucky. Y'all have been in a school where a lot of people feel the same way about stuff. But eventually you're going to get out of this bubble and realize not everyone sees the world the same way you do. And then you're going to run into some of this. And you can sit there and fight with them about it, but that's a fruitless endeavor. All right, if Johnny thinks the American flag represents freedom and I think it represents greed, let's say, are we ever going to change each other's mind? Or are we just going to get to fight about it to where we don't like each other anymore? Probably choice B, right? Okay, so that's one of the issues we run into. Let's look at this instead of me just ranting about symbols. Let's look at this poem, all right? He says, the poem of the mind let me read it again. The poem of the mind in the act of finding what will suffice. It has not always had to find. The scene was set. It repeated what was in the script. Then the theater was changed to something else. The past was a souvenir. Okay, so now we get a little bit of symbolism here, like poetry is like the theater, or simile there anyway. But he starts out with originally poetry was kind of formulaic. It followed the same patterns. If Thomas sat down was going to write a sonnet, that sonnets have certain qualities to them. Okay, there's one that you don't ever change. How many lines are in a sonnet? I'm going to be really impressed. How many lines are in a sonnet?
14.
Yes, sir. 14. What if it's 15? It's not a sonnet. Just good job. It's not a sonnet now. 15 is not a sonnet. It's just a poem. All right. The type of sonnet you're writing has different rhyme scheme, and everything's laid out for you. Doesn't mean it's easy to write, but I can say, I'm sitting down to write a sonnet. I got 14 lines. I've at least check that box, move on. But he says then something happens and it changes. And then when they say the past was a souvenir, in other words, that's cute. Let's do something else now. All right, we want to break these rules. It says it has to be living, to learn the speech of the place. It has to face the men of the time and to meet the women of the time. It has to think about war and it has to find what will suffice. It has to construct a new stage. It has to be on that stage and like an insatiable actor, slowly and with meditation, speak words that in the delicatest ear of the mind, repeat exactly that which it wants to hear, and the sound of which an invisible audience listens. Not to the play, but to itself, expressed in an emotion as of two people, as of two emotions becoming one. The actor is a metaphysician in the dark, twanging an instrument, twanging a wiry string that gives sounds passing through sudden rightness. wholly containing the mind, below which it cannot descend, below which it has no will to rise. It must be the finding of a satisfaction. It may be of a man skating, a woman dancing, a woman combing. The poem of the act of the mind. All right? You look at that like, what does that mean? He's telling you the difference in poetry that's written by a formula and poetry that's written through, depth and experience and emotion. All right? You get the symbolist part because it's like the theater. He's using that as your kind of representation of what a poem should do today. Plays speak to people in different ways. All right? My wife's big on plays. One day she wants me to take her to New York and go to Broadway, and I'm cool with that. I think that'd be a neat experience. But she watches them on, way more than I do. Okay, I get in her car for all of since this summer. I get in the car and immediately hit the eject button on her CD because I know what's in there. I'm not trying to listen to the Hamilton soundtrack for the 6 billionth time. All right, I've heard it. Don't want to hear it anymore. Okay. When I watched it, I was like, that's pretty cool. I like some of the lines, whatever. My father-in-law won't even watch it because Alexander Hamilton wasn't black, so I'm not going to watch it because that's a great reason. All right. He also wasn't like a pasty white dude either, just for the record. But he would love it if someone ghost-looking like me was playing him instead. Okay. So there's a lot of reasons people get different views of it. All right. It doesn't. Now, is he right or am I right? Or is my wife right? My wife thinks it's one of the most brilliant things ever written. I would disagree, but I think it's good. I wouldn't quite say great. If I come home at the end of the day, I'm not gonna be like, you know what I'm feeling? A musical right now. I'm gonna put on. Check this thing out again. It's not gonna happen. My son watches it a lot. Maddox. I go in there and he's always watching it. All right, well. Not my world, okay? So, it speaks to people in different ways. And Stevens is trying to point out that poems should do the same thing. He's got a lot of description here. And your questions here, it's going to say, what are symbolists and what do they believe? So we've already covered that. That's going to be in your background. That's not going to be in the poem. Then it says, what point is made about poetry in antiquity? So old poems, what point did I make about them? How are they written? By a formula. Yeah, be confident in your answers. You know the answer. Hey, and if you're wrong, be confident in that too. It's okay. Half the time people will listen to your answer if you're confident. Like, I didn't think that was the answer, but maybe it is. He sure thinks it is. All right, so be confident. So most poems in antiquity were written by formula. They were very much so. It's not a poem if it doesn't meet these requirements. It says, how does Stevens indicate that this changed? Well, that's in that little line around line 5. It says the theater changed to something else. He's saying at some point we had a rebellion against it, and we decided we don't want to write that way anymore. You get stuff like this, or heaven forbid, E.E. Cummings stuff. Can you imagine if he was in Lived when sonnets were written and he turned out that grasshopper poem? You think he'd have gotten that published? No, they'd have been like, you sir, are on drugs. So, I don't know if it was your class or 6th period, but I think it was 6th period because Luke Howard was like, I think that guy's on drugs. He may have been. But they definitely would have thought that back then. Like, this isn't a sonnet. What are you writing? So what are some of the new issues that current poets have to deal with? Now, that's in that big stanza. Look at that. It has to be living. It has to learn the speech of the place. It has to face the men of the time and meet the women of the time. What do you think he means when he says a poem has to be living? I hear people talk about the Bible a lot like it's a living text. What do they mean by that? Good. That works. That's part of it. Like, it was written thousands of years ago, but it still has meaning today. Also, there's another key element to it. Anybody else? That was a good job, Miles. Anything else? Okay, good. There's a lot of emotion tied into it. It's not just, okay, well, some of it you can get into parts where you're like, Matthew, I think it's 1 where it's a list of Jesus' genealogy. I've read that. I don't read it every time. Sometimes when I go back and read Matthew, I'm like, okay, I know it's in the first chapter. I mean, I know it's in the other chapters too, but that one is just a bunch of names that I would be really embarrassed if I tried to pronounce out loud. Okay? But you know what else they mean by living? They mean that, if you read it when you're your age, and then you read it again when you're my age, you might get something different out of it. Same words, but it impacts you differently. Okay, that's a living text. He's saying that poems now need to be that way. They may not have been once, but he says they need to be now. If they're going to be relevant, Hunter needs to be able to understand why it applies to him now. And then maybe when he's my age, reads it again, it's like, oh, okay, I get that. Think about the poems we read yesterday, like E.E. Cummings. That means something different to you. Now, let's pretend for a second like you really like poetry and want to read it. Not like it means to you like, oh my gosh, Mr. Morris, are we doing this nonsense again? Okay? No, we're not talking about that. But if you're your age or you're the age that you're going to be next year when you're seniors, stuff like that has one meaning. about, you're changing from you for most of your life have had a very, steady type of life. In August you're coming back, you're in a different grade, but really, is this that different than ninth grade? No. You said that really quick. Yeah, it's the same thing. And next year, there's gonna be a little bit different. Hopefully we won't be all like, having to do masks and everything. But, there's gonna be differences. It'll be the last of a lot of stuff. That'll impact you a little bit. But after you're a senior, then there's a big shift. You go to the military, you get a job, you go to college, whatever your changing is, it's not going to be like everything from before. So that might mean a lot to you then. Me at 42, and I read the same poem, and it talks about growing up and things like that. I've passed the getting married and having my kids and having a career thing. I'm already into that. So I get something different from it. While Hunter's looking at it as all these big events coming up in his future, I got things to think about like, man, I hope I don't die. That's what I'm thinking about when I read. The guy gets a line about, one day anyone died, I guess. And I'm like, I hope that's not what happens when I die. I don't want Jake to say, oh, Mr. Morris died. Huh? Who knew? That's sad. All right. Well, anyway, back to whatever. I mean, that's not the ending I want. I'm guessing Hunter's not thinking about that when he's reading that poem. Not like, man, I hope when I die, such and such. Y'all aren't thinking about that right now. So that's what it means by a poem needs to be living. It needs to change with us. You think that's easy to do? Not at all. It was easier. He's pointing out it was easier back then. It's much harder now. There's more to that, by the way, but I'll let you puzzle with it. This is what difficulties does the poet face based on this poem. And at the end, it says it must be finding satisfaction, maybe of a man skating, a woman dancing, a woman combing. The poem is an act of the mind. It's how do you capture, ideas today that people are going to care about? And what are you going to do to make, this poem have value to people? I mean, how am I going to make, Thomas Wilkes care about modern poetry? I didn't do it, I know, but I'm trying, man. I'm taking a shot. I'm doing better than if I said, hey, y'all read that and answer those questions. Because we all know what would happen. Then first of all, half of you would do the questions, right? And some of you would be like, I hope this is on that Slater thing. I got to figure this out. I don't want to actually answer these. And then one or two of you might actually attempt it. All right. So let's look at another example of this. Flip over to page 789. Here's another that's going to be kind of symbolic in a way, called Ars Poetica. It says, a poem should be palpable and mute as a globed fruit, dumb and old medallions to the thumb, silent as the sleeve-worn stone of casement ledges where the moss has grown. A poem should be wordless as the flight of birds. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs, leaving as the moon releases twig by twig the night-entangled trees, leaving as the moon behind the winter leaves memory by memory the mind. There's more on the next page. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs. A poem should be equal to not true. For all the history of grief, an empty doorway and a maple leaf. For love, the leaning grasses and two lights above the sea. A poem should not mean but be. Okay. Hey, of the three poems we're going to read today in our book, that's the one I like. The other two, but this one I like. Look at all the contrasting images in there. Look at stanza 3. A poem should be, now I'm just saying that, a poem should be silent as a sleeve-worn stone. How do you write a poem that's silent? That seems to me like you wouldn't have a poem, right? And it doesn't say anything. This is really a lot about, again, that concept of experiencing a poem, but there needs to be some depth to it. When we talk about poetry, it looks easy. I know some kids were thinking probably we're showing you that E. Cummings stuff. Anybody could do that. They can. It is so much easier to write a sonnet than it is to write that grasshopper poem. Hey, I know what a sonnet's got to have. I know I got to have 14 lines. If I'm going to write an Italian sonnet, it's going to have 8 lines at the beginning. They're going to kind of present a problem. They're all going to talk about that. It's going to have a certain rhyme scheme. So I've already got that laid out. I know the last 6, those are going to be the solution. And I know, again, a very basic rhyme scheme that's already been established for me. Now I'm going to say, write me a poem about a grasshopper that looks weird. I mean, it seems like it'd be easy, right? It's not. Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't write a poem about a grasshopper. If you told me 5 lines, this is the rhyme scheme, write about a grasshopper, I'd be like, man, I'm already lost. So this stuff is not easy. Look at all the things he presents. So let's look at our questions here. What are some ironic traits of poetry? I gave you one. It's supposed to be silent, but you can look at any of these stanzas. There's a ton of them. All right. What message is being contained in these odd traits? What he's trying to tell you guys is that poetry is not as simple as we think it is. And for it to have meaning, it's got to operate on multiple levels. It can't just be that simple poem. That some of the stuff we saw, you remember way back? I know you don't, but let's just try to dig in the back of your head. Remember those poems from way back when we talked about like the 1600s? Anne Bradstreet writing a poem about, like, she wrote one about her house burning down. Yeah. I mean, what was that poem about? It was about her house burning down. She wrote one about her husband, how much she loved him. She's basically saying, hey, look, I love my husband more than you love yours. That's the whole poem. I mean, you're not going to dig a lot of meaning out of Anne Bradstreet, okay? But this stuff, man, and a lot of people prefer that to this, and I get it. Because we don't like to think, right? Thinking's a pain in the butt. That's why a lot of you hate my test. Now, you guys are lucky. Y'all get the 20 or 16 or so multiple choice, and then you get that written stuff, and you're like, I'm just going to scribble some stuff down and hope Mr. Morris is just being generous and not reading them this time. I know that's what you think. All right? Sometimes I am generous and I still read them, though. I'm like, what kind of nonsense did Miles give me? Yep, there it is. This is crazy, all right? But, it's valuable enough. Let's give him some points. He tried, all right? Now, the honors class, on the other hand, has 8 questions that are written, and that's it. And I read every word of theirs and break it down. Like, I don't know about that. You got to think about it. And a lot of it should be easy. If I say something like, okay, based on this poem, should I teach poetry in high school English classes, or should we forget about poetry and focus on things that are more relevant to kids today? Write me an opinion about it. You should be like thanking Jesus when you get that question. Why? Amen. It's an opinion.
A lot of them are whenever you give it to us.
That's how I save your grades. Because it's an opinion. Like Josh just got to defend his opinion. That's it. That's what you got to do. You got to say, Mr. Morris, honestly, I love you, man, but poetry, I hate it. It shouldn't be in high school. And here's the reason why I think we should omit it. And then give me good reasons. I may disagree with you 110%, but you know what? You answer the question. 12 points right there for the honors class. There's 12 points apiece. So, I mean, those types of things, people hate them because they got to think about it. It's not as simple as a multiple choice question where you don't do no thinking. All right, some of y'all stare at them a lot, but that's not thinking. You're just praying that all of a sudden the answer's going to pop in your head. Was it a dagger or a sword? I don't know. That's not thinking. That's just begging your brain to spit out an answer. All right? And a lot of y'all do that. I can see the frustration. I don't see that on the written stuff. I see more like, because you're shaking your hands because you wrote a whole sentence. Right? I see the hand shaking, and I don't see a lot of deep thought going. But it's okay. That's what we're building to, because people don't like doing it. Now, y'all come and sit in on the honors class when they're doing it. Come sit in my third period class. And I don't mean to I'm not saying that. I'm giving her a compliment. And watch Carly Pierce answer a question. I mean, she's agonizing over every detail, making sure it's all correct. She'll come up to me 3 times and say, hey, did I do this right? I mean, that's actually having to think about it. And you know what are y'all gonna remember, whether Macbeth had a dagger or a sword? Are you gonna remember that question that you spent 20 minutes constructing? I mean, probably neither. But there's a better chance of me getting something out of the second one than the first one. We don't like thinking, and you know what? It shows in our world today, doesn't it? A lot. I don't care what your political beliefs are. Both sides don't think about anything. They throw both of them out at you. We're going to eliminate everybody's student debt. That's great thinking. I wish that could happen. But that's going to be really hard to pay off because there's a ton of student debt out there. All right? I mean, I wish that was true. I think that should happen. I don't think we can afford it. I wish it would. Hey, I don't know a single penny anymore. And my kids don't. But I'd love Allie not to have to owe money if she goes to college. Well, but I had to pay bills. Why should she get off free? My grandpa had to go pee in an outhouse. I'm glad I got an indoor toilet. I'm glad he didn't say, nope, not in my house. You're going to pee in the woods like everybody else. Just because somebody else gets an easier life doesn't mean all of a sudden it's unfair. Okay? So that's the situation of poetry. Let's look at the last one. This is the one I told you. I kind of gave you guys a preview of. It was coming. The one where the lady talks about how she doesn't like poetry either. Now, there's more to it than that, obviously. All right, turn over to page 791, and wow, look at that little picture at the top. Some weird-looking art there. I'm not sure why they picked that particular thing for this. All right, this is called poetry. She says, I too dislike it. There are things that are important beyond all this fiddle. Reading it, however, with a perfect contempt for it, one discovers in it, after all, a place for the genuine. I love that first part. She's like, I think it's stupid too. There's a lot more important things in the world. She says, but when I read it and I just hate it, all of a sudden it starts to get to me. You get that there's a place for this kind of stuff. Hands that can grasp, eyes that can dilate, hair that can rise, if it must. These things are important, not because a high-sounding interpretation can be put upon them, but because they are useful. When they become so derivative as to become unintelligible, the same thing may be said for all of us, that we do not admire what we cannot understand. The bat holding on upside down or in quest of something to eat. Elephants pushing a wild horse taking a roll, a tireless wolf under a tree, the immovable critic twitching his skin like a horse that feels a flea, the baseball fan, the statistician, nor is it valid to discriminate against business documents and school books. All these phenomena are important. One must make a distinction, however. When dragged into prominence by half-poets, the result is not poetry, nor till the poets among us can be literalists of the imagination, above insolence and triviality, and can present for inspection imaginary gardens with real toads in them. Shall we have it? Shall we have it? In the meantime, if you demand on the one hand the raw material of poetry and all its rawness, and that which is on the other hand genuine, you are interested in poetry. You know what makes this one hard to read when you're reading along? What makes this poem hard to read? Not our wording. Our wording is very simple. What makes it difficult? Teach you a new word that's not in your book. Well, let me tell you, if I'm going to guess, okay, and who's going to volunteer for me to use you? You don't have to do anything. I'm just going to use you in my example here. Okay, Cam, thank you. I'm not saying you would do this, but let's pretend for a second. I say, Cam, read these poems, and Cam goes, let's just go ahead and read it. I too dislike it. There are things that are important beyond all this fiddle. Reading it, however, with a perfect contempt for it, one discovers in it, after all, a place for the genuine. Hands that can grasp eyes. Look at that sentence if you read it that way. Hands that can grasp eyes, that sounds terrible. Yeah, exactly. All right. It's what we call enjammed. The punctuation, the sentences carry on. You have to read it knowing that. All right. You don't read prose that way. You don't stop at the end of each line. But we do it in poetry for some reason. All right. So that's what makes it confusing. I think she does that on purpose. But let's look at my questions here. Let's see if we can come up with some sort of, what does Mr. Morse want me to get out of this? It says, what ironic point does the speaker make as the poem begins? What does she say right away? First few words. Right, she's writing a poem about how she doesn't like poems. That's kind of ironic, wouldn't you say? Then why are you writing a poem? Well, I was like, I hate spaghetti. I'm going to go open a spaghetti restaurant, make lots of spaghetti. All right? And I eat it every night, by the way. It says, how does she reconcile that statement with why we should read poetry later? She talks about later that it has its place. It has its purpose. And if you do it well, it definitely has its place. And one of the things she points out is the people who are bad at it are really what messed it up. That's where there's an issue. And again, I wish I had a copy of it with me, man. My wife thought it was really cool. She bought me a book of poems for Christmas. And I appreciate that. Some of the worst poetry I've ever read in my life. The only thing good about it is the title. After you get past the title, you're like, none of this makes sense. It's like 2 lines of a guy saying, last night I fell asleep. I wish that it was night again. I'm like, well, okay. That's a poem? That's just what you guys say all the time. You wake up saying, man, I can't wait till it's 4 o'clock and I come back home and go back to sleep. You don't do that, but this is what you think. This is what you're thinking when you get up. So when I'm thinking at 5 a.m. when I roll out of bed and it's still dark and I'm like, oh man, it's Friday, a few hours, and I can come back in here and I go to sleep and I don't have to wake up at 5 a.m. All right? That's not a poem. That's a bad poet pretending to be a poet. What is there in that that's deep? Nothing. All right? So that's kind of what she's pointing out. So poetry is great if you have good people doing it. She's kind of making a side that there's a lot of people bad doing it, though, and they're making it look really sorry. Okay? What kinds of things does this speaker think are contained in good poetry? It's stuff that, causes you some sort of emotion. All 3 of them kind of hit that. There's a reason they're all 3 taught together. All right, honestly, this is why I don't get my feelings hurt. If Allie was the same as Mr. Morse, I just didn't like that poem. Okay, that's fine. I wouldn't even mind if you said, I think this poem's a bad poem. I might ask you why. I think it's hard to describe that sometimes, but it's because you and me have different experiences. Maybe I get something out of it and you don't, and that's fine. Same thing with songs. And some of y'all tell me, man, Mr. Morse, you should listen to this song. It's a country song, and it really has a lot of meaning to it. I didn't grow up on the bayou with the truck, so it doesn't have the same meaning to me. But maybe for somebody who did, Craig Harrell, maybe it means a lot to him. Okay? And that doesn't mean it's good or bad. And it doesn't mean, well, it's bad for me and it's good for him. No, it's not either. It's just that's something that like gets him. Okay? I listen to cheesy music from the 80s. Is it because the music's great? No, it's because there's something about it that just makes me remember what it was like to be alive back then. Back before I had to take 9 different pills so I could just still not die every day. Back in those days where, I was sitting where you are. And I was like, man, this English teacher's so full of crap. Well, I'm going to get out. This isn't going to matter when I'm a big rock star one day. That didn't work out. I remember those days, and those songs make me think about that. Does it mean that, Motley Crue really has value in the world today? Not even a little. Not even a little, but to me it does. And that's one of the things we have to look at when we look at these poems. All right? So there's nothing wrong with the fact that Jake's like, I don't like them. Well, neither did this lady. Finally, we got, what do you think the speaker of this poem would think about teachers forcing students in junior English classes to learn about poetry? What do you think she would say? Exactly. She'd say it's a bad idea. We shouldn't do it. Poetry's not for education classes, in her opinion, probably. No, she doesn't say that in here, but I'm guessing. And I think she might be right. Now, I still teach it to you because I know you're going to get it in other places. And I know you're going to get the other version of it. I want you to understand that that's not all there is to it. I want you to understand that there is an emotional quality to it. I think poetry and good music are hand in hand the same thing. And just because I think bluegrass music is terrible doesn't mean that Quentin can't love it and say, Mr. Morris, it just reminds me. My mom listened to soft rock from the 80s. And don't think there's not days where I don't pop it on. Just not because I think that Rod Stewart's just a terrific musician, because I don't. But I do. It makes me remember what it was like to ride from Dauphin Island into where my grandparents were living, back and forth. And I remember those trips when we'd leave at 9 o'clock because we had to stay there because my mom would work like 60 hours a week. And so my grandparents or my great-grandma would take care of us. And on the way back out to where we lived, she would have that music on. And I'd be listening to it because it's like, I'm like you guys, man. I'm not talking to my mom. I didn't have my phone to distract me like you guys did. And it was dark, so I couldn't read a book. Yeah, I used to read books. Go ahead, judge me. All right? But what I do is I listen to the radio. And so now I hear those songs that makes me think about it again. I have all of her old Christmas albums. It's all the cheesiest Christmas music you can think of. All right? My kids hate it. My wife hates it. But when they're all gone and it was Christmas time, I put those on and make me remember being 8 years old again. And sitting there sleeping underneath the Christmas tree with those big old bulbs that literally could cause a fire at any moment. Okay? They were blazing hot. If you touched it, your hand was going to be, red as could be. Not like the ones today, which are like, you can touch them and they feel like they're not even on. I'm taken back to that moment, laying there under that tree, thinking about, man, it's another, 16 days until Christmas. All right? That's the stuff that songs do. This stuff is supposed to be able to pull off the same thing. All right? It's not going to right now, probably. But what I hope one day, maybe Thomas is, cleaning out got a bunch of school crap he saved. He's cleaning stuff out. He's like, I remember when Mr. Morris showed us this. I'm looking at it like, I never thought about that. That's kind of cool. It doesn't matter if he didn't have to change his life. Just for one moment, say, man, I miss school kind of. I know you're never going to say that, right? But I miss school kind of. Life was easier back then in some ways. It was. Trust me, it will be. Okay? So anyway, that's these 3 poems, and that will finish up what we've got today. It drug out a lot longer than I intended, but guys, I like talking about this stuff. Not these poems. They're not even that good, in my opinion. But I like talking about what they mean, and I think that's what stuff like this is about. It's about setting up that conversation. All right, well, we're going to stop there. Yeah, I've got like 4 minutes left. I don't think y'all will make it. It's good.